My SEAL Admiral shoved a loaded pistol against my skull, pressed his lips to my ear, and whispered, "You die today." I felt the cold metal tremble as his finger tightened on the trigger. I tried to breathe, but my breath froze when he said, "No one will ever find your body out here." And then, bang! Blood splashed across my eyes. My ears rang. The world tilted. And through the ringing, through the chaos, through the darkness swallowing me, I heard someone scream my call sign, "Black Phantom, move." That was the moment I realized the Admiral didn't pull the only trigger on that island. Before I continue, please like this video, subscribe, and comment where you're watching from. Your support keeps this channel alive. But let me take you back to where this nightmare really began. Because what happened on that island wasn't just an execution attempt. It was the culmination of months of psychological warfare, systematic sabotage, and pure hatred that had been building like a storm inside one man's corrupted soul. My name is Lieutenant Mara Steele, call sign Black Phantom, and I was supposed to be dead by now. The fact that I'm speaking to you means someone failed. And I'm about to tell you exactly how that failure became the most beautiful sound I've ever heard. The pain in my wrists was excruciating. The zip ties had cut so deep that blood was pooling in my palms, mixing with the dirt and grime of that godforsaken island. My uniform was torn, my knees pressed into the rocky soil, and my neck ached from holding my head up to meet his eyes. Because even in that moment, even with death breathing down my neck, I refused to look down. I refused to give him that satisfaction. Admiral Harrison Blackwood circled me like a predator savoring his kill. The smirk on his face wasn't just satisfaction, it was pure, venomous pleasure. He had orchestrated this moment, planned it, dreamed about it. And now he was living it. "You thought you were untouchable, didn't you, Steele?" His voice dripped with years of accumulated rage. The golden girl, the prodigy, the Black Phantom who could slip through enemy lines like smoke and return with intelligence that made grown men weep with relief. The fury in his voice was palpable, and I could taste the bitterness that had been eating him alive. This wasn't just about military protocol or chain of command. This was personal. This was a man whose ego had been shattered, whose authority had been questioned, whose very identity had been threatened by my existence. "You made me look like a fool in front of the Pentagon," he hissed, kneeling down so his face was inches from mine. "You disobeyed a direct order and made me look incompetent. Do you have any idea what that cost me? Do you understand the damage you did to my career?" The rage in his eyes was frightening, but what terrified me more was the calculated coldness underneath it. This wasn't a crime of passion. This was premeditated murder, disguised as a routine evaluation, carried out in the middle of nowhere where screams would only reach the seabirds. "This isn't an evaluation." I finally spoke, my voice hoarse but steady. "This is an execution." His laugh was hollow and cruel. "You always were too smart for your own good, Steele. Yes, this is an execution. And it's long overdue." That's when I realized the full scope of his hatred. This man, this admiral who is supposed to represent honor, integrity, and leadership, had brought me to this remote island with one purpose: to kill me and make sure my body would never be found. But to understand how we got to that moment, you need to know who I was before that gun was pressed against my skull. You need to understand why I became a threat worth killing. I earned my call sign Black Phantom during my first solo reconnaissance mission in Somalia. I was 24 years old, the youngest female officer ever assigned to stealth operations, and I had something to prove to a military that still questioned whether women belonged in combat zones. The mission was supposed to be simple: gather intelligence on a terrorist cell's weapons cache and report back. Standard recon. In and out. No contact, no engagement, just observation and documentation. But when I arrived at the coordinates, I discovered something that changed everything. The weapons cache wasn't just a stockpile, it was an active distribution center. And the terrorists weren't just storing weapons, they were preparing to move them to 3 different locations across the region for simultaneous attacks on civilian targets. The original plan was to observe for 72 hours and exfiltrate. But if I followed orders, hundreds of innocent people would die within the week. So I made a choice. I went dark for 6 days. For 6 days, I moved through that compound like a ghost, documenting everything, mapping their entire network, identifying key players, and tracking their communication patterns. I lived off rations and rainwater, slept 2 hours at a time, and recorded every detail of their operation. When I finally made contact with base, I had enough intelligence to dismantle not just that cell but their entire regional network. The Pentagon used my information to coordinate strikes that prevented 3 major terrorist attacks and saved an estimated 800 civilian lives. I returned to base as a legend. The Black Phantom, the woman who disappeared into enemy territory and emerged with intelligence that changed the course of an entire operation. But legends, I learned, can make enemies faster than they make friends. Admiral Blackwood was not impressed by my success. He was threatened by it, because my decision to extend the mission and gather that additional intelligence made his original orders look inadequate. It made him look like a commander who couldn't see the bigger picture, who was content with half measures while lives hung in the balance. The commendation I received from the Pentagon was the first crack in our relationship. The second crack came 6 months later, during an operation that would define both our careers, but for very different reasons. The hostage extraction mission in Yemen was supposed to be routine. 12 aid workers had been captured by a militant group, and we had 72 hours before they would be moved to a location where rescue would be impossible. The intelligence was solid. The compound was mapped. The entry and exit routes were clear. But Admiral Blackwood's plan had a fatal flaw that I spotted immediately. "Sir, the extraction route takes us directly through a choke point," I told him during the briefing. "If they have overwatch positions on those ridgelines, we'll be sitting ducks." His response was swift and venomous. "I didn't ask for your opinion, Lieutenant. You follow orders. You don't give them." But I couldn't let it go. Not when I could see the tactical disaster unfolding before it happened. Not when 3 of my SEAL teammates would be walking into a trap alongside those hostages. "Sir, I've studied the terrain. There's an alternate route that—" "Enough." His voice echoed through the briefing room. "One more word, Steele, and you're off this mission entirely." So I stayed quiet during the briefing. But when we hit the ground, when I saw those ridge positions exactly where I knew they'd be, when I heard the first shots echo through the valley as our team walked into that choke point, I made another choice. I broke protocol. I abandoned the planned route. And I took those hostages and 3 SEAL team members through the alternate path I had mapped in my head. The main assault team walked into a kill zone. The Admiral's plan fell apart in the first 30 seconds. But my team, my impromptu, unauthorized team, extracted all 12 hostages without a single casualty. When we reached the extraction point, I radioed the situation report. Black Phantom to command. 12 hostages secured. 3 friendly casualties from main assault team. All hostages and secondary team members are code green. The silence that followed was deafening. Then Admiral Blackwood's voice crackled through the radio, ice cold with rage. "Black Phantom, you were ordered to follow the extraction plan." "Sir, the extraction plan would have resulted in multiple KIA. I adapted to ensure mission success and personnel safety. You disobeyed a direct order." "Sir, I prioritized the lives of the hostages and our team members." Another silence. Then, "We'll discuss this when you return to base." But we never had that discussion, because 3 days later, the Pentagon called me directly. Not Admiral Blackwood. Me. "Lieutenant Steele, this is General Morrison. I want to personally commend you for your actions in Yemen. Your tactical adaptation saved 15 lives and turned a potential disaster into a complete success." The commendation was public. The recognition was immediate. And Admiral Blackwood's humiliation was absolute. That phone call was the moment our conflict transformed from professional disagreement to personal warfare. Because in the Admiral's mind, I hadn't just disobeyed orders, I had exposed his incompetence for the entire military hierarchy to see. From that day forward, he began a systematic campaign to destroy my career, my reputation, and ultimately my life. It started with the psychological evaluations. Suddenly, I was required to undergo monthly psychological assessments, supposedly as part of routine monitoring for high-stress operatives. The questions were invasive, designed to create doubt about my mental stability. Do you ever question orders before following them, Lieutenant Steele? Have you experienced any episodes where you felt your judgment was superior to your commanding officers? Do you struggle with authority figures? The reports that came back painted a picture of an officer with potential insubordination issues and concerning patterns of independent decision-making. None of it was technically false, but all of it was weaponized against me. Then came the equipment failures. During a routine inspection, explosives were found in my personal locker. Explosives I had never seen before, in a locker that had been sealed for weeks while I was deployed. "This is a serious security breach, Lieutenant," Admiral Blackwood said as military police surrounded my quarters. "Unauthorized explosive materials in your personal storage constitutes a federal offense." The investigation was swift and convenient. The explosives were traced to a shipment that had gone missing 6 months earlier. The implication was clear. I had stolen military ordnance for unknown purposes. But here's what they didn't expect. I had maintained detailed logs of every piece of equipment I had ever been issued, signed for, or handled. Every serial number, every date, every witness signature. When the investigators cross-referenced my logs with the official records, they found something interesting. The explosives in my locker had been signed out to Admiral Blackwood's office 3 weeks before they appeared in my possession. The charges were quietly dropped. The investigation was sealed. And Admiral Blackwood's hatred for me intensified into something approaching obsession. The solo missions came next. Suddenly, every assignment I received was a single-operator reconnaissance mission. No backup, no communication windows, no support teams. Just me, dropped into hostile territory with minimal resources and maximum risk. "The Black Phantom works best alone," he would tell other officers. "She's proven that she doesn't work well with others anyway." But I knew the truth. These missions weren't designed to utilize my strengths. They were designed to kill me. The intelligence was always incomplete. The extraction windows were always narrow. The risk factors were always higher than necessary. Somalia, Afghanistan, Syria, Iraq. Mission after mission, I was sent into situations that should have resulted in my death or capture. But each time, I completed the mission and returned with intelligence that exceeded expectations. Each success was another nail in Admiral Blackwood's psychological coffin. Because every time I survived a mission he had designed to kill me, I proved that his authority was meaningless and his power was an illusion. The breaking point came when I accidentally intercepted one of his encrypted communications. I was monitoring enemy frequencies during a mission in Iraq when I picked up a transmission on a secure military channel. The encryption was sophisticated, but not sophisticated enough. When I ran the signal through my decryption protocols, what I found made my blood run cold. Admiral Blackwood was selling American weapons to arms dealers in the region. The same weapons that were being used against American forces. The same weapons that had killed American soldiers. The transmission I intercepted included confirmation codes, delivery coordinates, and payment details. It was enough evidence to end his career and put him in federal prison for the rest of his life. But it was also evidence that made me a liability. Because if Admiral Blackwood was willing to sell weapons to enemy combatants, he would certainly be willing to kill one inconvenient Navy lieutenant. I encrypted the evidence and uploaded it to a secure server with instructions for automatic release if I failed to check in within 72-hour intervals. It was my insurance policy. But as I would soon learn, insurance policies are only effective if the person trying to kill you knows they exist. The evaluation order came 3 weeks later. "Lieutenant Steele, you're being assigned to a classified evaluation exercise," Admiral Blackwood informed me during what I thought was a routine briefing. "Your recent mission performance has raised some questions about your readiness for advanced operations. This evaluation will determine your future clearance level." The orders looked legitimate. The paperwork was properly filed. The authorization codes checked out. There was no reason to suspect that I was being led to my execution. "Where is the evaluation taking place, sir?" "That's classified until departure. You'll be briefed en route." "What type of evaluation am I undergoing?" "Comprehensive assessment. Combat readiness, psychological stability, tactical decision-making under extreme stress." Standard protocol for operatives being considered for promotion. Everything he said sounded reasonable. But something in his eyes, a glimmer of anticipation, a hint of satisfaction, made my instincts scream warnings. Who will be conducting the evaluation, sir? I will be personally overseeing the process, Lieutenant, along with a select team of evaluators. That should have been my first red flag. Admiral Blackwood had never personally overseen evaluations. He delegated that responsibility to other officers while he focused on strategic planning and operational oversight. His personal involvement was unprecedented and unnecessary. But I was a Navy lieutenant, and he was an admiral. When he gave orders, I followed them, even when those orders were leading me to my death. The flight to the island took 6 hours. I was the only passenger on a military transport that could have carried 50 personnel. That should have been red flag number 2. Where are the other evaluators, sir? I asked during the flight. They're already on site, preparing the evaluation scenarios. What type of scenarios will I be facing? You'll know when you need to know, Lieutenant. That's part of the evaluation, how you react to unknown situations with incomplete information. Red flag number 3 was the island itself. When we landed, there were no other personnel visible. No evaluation team. No support staff. No medical personnel. No observers. Just Admiral Blackwood, 2 armed guards, and me. Sir, where is the evaluation team? They're positioned throughout the island, monitoring and recording your performance. But there were no observation posts. No communication equipment. No evaluation materials. Just empty beach, dense forest, and the growing certainty that I had walked into a trap. The evaluation began immediately. I was given a basic survival kit and told that I had 24 hours to complete a series of objectives scattered across the island. No map. No communication device. No backup plan. Your first objective is to locate and neutralize 3 target positions, Admiral Blackwood explained, his voice carrying that same anticipatory satisfaction I had noticed earlier. You'll have no support, no intelligence, and no extraction until the evaluation is complete. I should have refused right then. I should have demanded proper evaluation protocols, observer oversight, and safety measures. But military conditioning runs deep, and questioning orders in the field can result in court-martial. So I began the evaluation, knowing that something was fundamentally wrong but unable to identify the specific threat. For 18 hours, I moved through that island, searching for objectives that didn't exist, looking for targets that were never placed, following an evaluation structure that was designed to exhaust me both physically and mentally. By the time the sun began to set, I was dehydrated, disoriented, and running on pure adrenaline. That's when Admiral Blackwood appeared again. Evaluation complete, Lieutenant, he said, emerging from the tree line with his 2 guards flanking him. Time for your debrief. But this wasn't a debrief. This was an ambush. The zip ties came out before I could react. The guards were trained and efficient, and I was too exhausted to mount effective resistance. Within seconds, I was on my knees in the dirt, wrists bound, looking up at a man whose mask had finally slipped completely. You want to know what your evaluation results were, Lieutenant? Admiral Blackwood asked, pulling his sidearm and checking the chamber. You failed. Catastrophically. The hatred in his voice was pure and undiluted now. This was a man who had been carrying rage for months, planning this moment, savoring the anticipation of my death. You failed because you're insubordinate. You failed because you're arrogant. You failed because you think you're smarter than your superiors. And most importantly, you failed because you know too much. That's when I understood. This wasn't about Yemen. This wasn't about the psychological evaluations or the equipment frames or the solo missions. This was about the intercepted transmission. This was about the evidence of his arms dealing. This was about silencing the only person who could destroy him. You intercepted something you shouldn't have seen, didn't you? He continued, circling me like a predator. You picked up one of my communications. You know about the business arrangements I've made to supplement my military income. The business arrangements. That's how he justified selling weapons to enemies. That's how he rationalized betraying his own country and getting his own soldiers killed. It was just business. You're selling weapons to the enemy, I said, my voice steady despite the fear coursing through my veins. You're responsible for American deaths. His response was swift and brutal, the barrel of his pistol pressed against my skull, cold metal biting into my skin. I'm responsible for keeping this operation secure, he hissed directly into my ear. And you're a security risk that needs to be eliminated. The pressure of the gun barrel increased, and I could feel his fingers settling onto the trigger. This was really happening. This was really how my life was going to end, executed by my own commanding officer on a deserted island where no one would ever find my body. My SEAL Admiral shoved a loaded pistol against my skull, pressed his lips to my ear, and whispered, "You die today." Those words will echo in my mind for the rest of my life. Not just because of what they meant for me, but because of how much satisfaction he derived from saying them. This man had fantasized about this moment, planned it, orchestrated it down to the smallest detail. I felt the cold metal tremble as his finger tightened on the trigger. But that trembling wasn't from nervousness or hesitation. It was from excitement. Admiral Blackwood was enjoying this moment more than any other in his military career. I tried to breathe, but my breath froze when he said, "No one will ever find your body out here." The finality of those words was devastating. This wasn't just murder, it was the complete erasure of my existence. No funeral, no investigation, no justice. Just disappearance and official records showing that Lieutenant Mara Steele died during a classified training exercise. But in that moment, when death seemed inevitable and escape seemed impossible, I remembered something I had done before leaving base. Something that might save my life, or at least ensure that my death wouldn't go unnoticed. Hidden in my collar was a micro-body camera disguised as a uniform pin. It was recording everything: the location, the conversation, the confession, the execution attempt. But more importantly, it was transmitting a low-frequency distress signal that included my call sign. When I had activated that device before departing for the evaluation, I had no idea I was documenting my own attempted murder. I thought I was just taking precautions against a suspicious mission. But that device was about to become the difference between justice and cover-up. And then, bang! The gunshot was deafening. The muzzle flash lit up the beach. Blood splattered across my face and chest. The ringing in my ears was so intense that I couldn't hear my own thoughts. But I wasn't dead. The blood wasn't mine. The bullet hadn't come from Admiral Blackwood's gun. Blood splashed across my eyes. My ears rang. The world tilted. And through the ringing, through the chaos, through the darkness swallowing me, I heard someone scream my call sign, "Black Phantom, move." That voice belonged to Commander Rylan Kane, my mentor, and the one person in the Navy who had been monitoring the distress signal from my body camera. The micro device in my collar had been transmitting for hours, sending encrypted location data and audio feeds to a secure server that Commander Kane monitored for all operators under his informal protection. When he heard Admiral Blackwood's confession and threats, he launched an unauthorized rescue mission. That was the moment I realized the Admiral didn't pull the only trigger on that island. Commander Kane's sniper shot had been perfectly timed and precisely aimed. As Admiral Blackwood's finger tightened on his trigger, Kane's bullet found its target. The blood that splashed across my face belonged to Admiral Blackwood, whose own execution attempt had been interrupted by a superior marksman. But the rescue was just the beginning. The real victory came when Commander Kane and his team secured the body camera footage that documented everything: the confession, the arms dealing, the attempted execution, and Admiral Blackwood's complete psychological breakdown. 3 days later, I walked into a Pentagon briefing room where Admiral Blackwood sat surrounded by military investigators, criminal prosecutors, and senior Navy officials. He looked confident, almost smug, clearly believing that his mission had been successful and that I was dead. When I entered the room, his face transformed from confidence to confusion to absolute terror. The color drained from his skin. His hands began to shake. And when the investigators played the audio recording of him saying, "You die today, no one will find your body out here," he collapsed into his chair as if his spine had been severed. The court-martial was swift and decisive. The evidence was overwhelming, and Admiral Blackwood's defense team could only argue for leniency rather than innocence. He was convicted of attempted murder, treason, illegal arms trafficking, and conspiracy against the United States military. But the moment I'll never forget was when military protocol required him to salute me before being escorted to federal prison. As a convicted officer being stripped of rank, he was required to show final respect to the fellow service member he had attempted to murder. His hand trembled as he raised it to his forehead. His eyes were filled with defeat, humiliation, and the knowledge that his entire legacy had been destroyed by the woman he had tried to kill. I did not return his salute. I stood in absolute silence, letting that silence serve as my final judgment of his character and actions. Today, I serve as Director of Tactical Oversight for Anti-Corruption Operations. My job is to identify and eliminate threats within our own military structure. Officers who have lost their way, who have forgotten their oaths, who have chosen personal gain over national service. Admiral Blackwood's arms dealing network was completely dismantled. 17 other officers were arrested. Millions of dollars in illegal weapons sales were prevented. And the intelligence community developed new protocols for monitoring internal communications to prevent similar operations. I returned to that island 6 months later, not as a victim, but as the commanding officer overseeing a new training facility for anti-corruption specialists. The beach where I almost died is now where we teach young officers how to identify and respond to corruption within their own ranks. Every time I stand on that beach, I remember Admiral Blackwood's words, "No one will ever find your body out here."
He was wrong about that.
But more importantly, he was wrong about something fundamental to military service, the belief that rank grants unlimited power, that authority cannot be questioned, and that loyalty flows only upward. True loyalty flows to the mission, to the country, and to the principles that define what it means to serve. When those principles are betrayed, rank becomes meaningless and authority becomes illegitimate. The Navy taught me to fight external enemies. Admiral Blackwood taught me to recognize internal ones. The Black Phantom call sign, which once meant a soldier who could disappear behind enemy lines, now means something different. It means the officer who appears wherever corruption exists, who documents what others try to hide, and who ensures that betrayal is met with justice. Some people ask if I'm angry about what happened to me, if I hold grudges against the system that nearly got me killed, if I've lost faith in military leadership. The answer is complicated. I'm angry about the betrayal. I'm furious about the arms dealing that got American soldiers killed. I'm enraged that Admiral Blackwood used his authority to try to murder a fellow service member. But I'm not angry about the system that ultimately protected me. I'm grateful for Commander Kane, who monitored that distress signal and launched an unauthorized rescue mission. I'm thankful for the investigators who pursued the evidence, wherever it led. I'm proud of the military justice system that held a corrupt admiral accountable for his crimes. The pain of that experience, the terror, the betrayal, the helplessness, that pain transformed into purpose. Every day I serve in anti-corruption operations is a day that another Admiral Blackwood might be identified before he can sell weapons to enemies or execute fellow service members. The Navy SEALs have a saying, "The only easy day was yesterday." For me, that saying means something different now. It means that yesterday, I was a victim. Today, I'm a protector. Tomorrow, I'll be whatever the mission requires. Admiral Blackwood thought he could eliminate me to protect his criminal enterprise. Instead, he created the very thing designed to hunt down and eliminate officers like him. Betrayal is loud. It screams with corruption, echoes with lies, and thunders with abuse of power. But truth roars louder. It roars with the voices of every service member who refuses to compromise their integrity. It roars with the sound of justice being served. It roars with the promise that no one, no matter their rank, their connections, or their authority, is above accountability. My name is Lieutenant Commander Mara Steele, call sign Black Phantom. I was supposed to be dead, but I'm very much alive and I'm hunting. Thank you for watching. Please like, subscribe, and comment your country below. Your support helps this channel reach more people who need to hear this story. Because somewhere out there, another Admiral Blackwood is planning his next betrayal. And somewhere out there, another young officer might need to know that survival is possible, justice is achievable, and truth always wins in the end. The Black Phantom is watching. Always.